Can you write in the chats if you can hear me well? Awesome. Welcome, Gina. Welcome, Dhaval. We'll give a few minutes for everyone to join in and we'll kick it off. So, how is everyone doing? A happy new year to all of you. Hi, Abhishek. Welcome, Evelyn. Happy New Year, Karan. Awesome. So, let's quickly get started. I will share my screen. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are for our next and the first TribeCast webinar for 2020, which is on leveraging Cypress Beyond Functional Tests. And we have Mary Drake with us. Before we get on to the webinar, I'll just share some few ground rules. We'll have the webinar for around 45 minutes, and then towards the end, we will do our Q&A session, which will be for 15 minutes. So along the webinar, if you have any questions for Mary, please put them in the Q&A tab on your right-hand side, and Mary will take them towards the end of the webinar. About the Test Tribe is India's largest software testing community. Our mission is to give testing craft the glory it deserves while we co-create smarter, prouder, and confident testers. Test Tribe has done a lot of events, conferences, workshop, boot camps. Our flagship event, Testaway, a lot of AMAs, and we have around 30 plus K testers attending our events. We have 30,000 global testers involved currently, and around 12,000 plus event attendees so far. We are in 9 cities physically in India and over 100 countries virtually. Regarding our upcoming events, we have a wonderful bootcamp by Rob Sab. Robert is a veteran in the testing space, and his webinar starts, his workshop basically starts from the 5th of February to the 27th of February. So this is going to be a 4-week hands-on online boot camp, which is going to be based on a problem-solving approach. There is a special 20% discount coupon here, which is webinar 20. If you can see on the bottom of my screen, this special discount of 20% will only last for the next 24 hours. So do grab it out. The bit.ly link is here, bit.ly/ATDDTA2. So check it out. Our next major conference, which is happening in March, which is the 4th, 5th, and 6th of March, exhaustive 15 workshops, 5 different themes. This is going to be a workshop which will be having live demonstrations. So this is something not to miss out on. We have our discounted tickets starting for 1350, and this is a coupon code which you can use, webinar. Now this discount will only last for the next 24 hours, so don't miss out on Work Friends. This is going to be a really unique conference, which is a mix of workshops and conference, which is going to happen in March. So don't miss this out. We also have our 4th batch of automation bootcamp with Selenium and Java by Kunal Asher. This is going to happen on 2nd of April 2022. This is the most extensive automation training program in Selenium and Java on the internet so far. It's a 12-week long bootcamp. The 20% discount coupon for Kunal Asher's workshop is over here, which is webinar again, which is going to last for 24 hours only. I will share the links with you also on chat, so don't miss this out. We are on Discord. We have real-time discussions, problems, testers helping other testers. So join us on Discord for real-time discussions around testing, around automation, around accessibility, around API testing, and lots more. And these are our social handles. We'll also put those links on the chat. for you to connect to us. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. This particular webinar will be also live on YouTube, and you can get connected to Telegram for our event updates. So that's about it, and let's quickly get started. So today's webinar topic is leveraging Cypress beyond functional tests. So we know that Cypress is one of the most popular frameworks in the JavaScript community, and beyond using Cypress for functional testing, there's a lot more we can do with this, right? You can do accessibility, you can do API testing, you can do visual testing. So in this webinar, I will hand it over to Mary, who will be talking more about how you can leverage Cypress to do visual testing. A quick bits about Mary. Mary is a quality engineering manager at Zoopla. uh, Mary is also popularly known in the testing space for sharing her knowledge with the community. She writes tech blogs at marydrake.com. I will also share the link with you on the chat soon. Mary loves to speak at a lot of meetups and conferences, and is an experienced veteran in test automation and continuous testing. So I call upon stage Mary Drake. Welcome. It's an honor to have you on the Test Drive meetup. The stage is yours, Mary.
Oh, hi everyone.
Hello.
Yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Um
Perfect.
yeah, thank you Josly for the really nice introduction. And yeah, like you said, Cypress is really popular, so I'm just happy to share my knowledge about Cypress, and this is actually my first talk for the year. So yep, I'm really grateful to be invited. So I'll kickstart the presentation. So let me just share my screen. Leveraging. Cool. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see the presentation. Okay. So again, my name is Marie, and welcome to my session called "Leveraging Cypress Beyond Functional Testing." So in this session, we'll look at how you can extend Cypress to cover tests beyond functional. So I'll specifically talk about visual testing and why it's important to add it into your testing strategy, but I'll also touch upon other types of testing that you can cover with Cypress. Apart from that, I'll also talk about, things that you should consider when doing visual testing. I'll talk about what, some of the tools that are available that can help you with visual testing. And at the end, I'll do a quick code, like walkthrough to show you how easy it is to integrate some of these visual tools to Cypress. I'm going to skip the introduction part because I think Jocelyn did a really excellent job. But yeah, just an addition. That's my 4-year-old daughter, Gabby. So yeah, let's get started. So to those of you that are new, to Cypress, Cypress is a tool that can automate the browser. Basically, it's a functional test runner that drives the browser just like a real user would do when they use your application. So it's a complete testing framework, and it's already bundled already with all of the other libraries that you need to start writing tests. So what tests can it cover? So Cypress can actually cover different types of, tests depending on what your requirements are. We all know that it can cover end-to-end tests, which can cover, core user journeys that's typically driven from a UI. They've also now have support for component testing. So this actually lets you test individual components in isolation without actually visiting a page. So what you can do is instead is you can mount the individual components on a browser. So at least it's something that your real user can do. So it's a step up to, let's say, when we think of like unit tests, when we can mount or we can, like try to mount like different components on a virtual DOM. So what's great with Cypress's component test is it actually lets you mount the component on a real browser. So it's much more closer to the user experience. Cypress also supports API testing since it has built-in commands, to make HTTP calls. There's a lot of, amazing like blog posts out there, like, some video tutorials, like showing you how you can write API tests with Cypress. I've actually written one, which you can find on my blog. I just basically wanted to show everyone that, it's very easy to use Cypress as like different commands, specifically the side that intercept or like the side that request to test the different API endpoints. Because Cypress has a wide range of plugin, this can actually enable you to cover basic accessibility tests. So one of the plugin that is available out there, it's called Cypress Axe. This is actually a plugin that is based on a standard library called Axcore. So Axcore is a standard tooling out there that a lot of like different people use for automated accessibility tests. And this plugin will basically check your application against different accessibility rules, and it will report any accessibility violations, which you can then relate to your team. Another type of test that some of you might not know is Cypress also has a plugin called Cypress Audit. So through this plugin, we can actually run some client-side performance tests. It does this by integrating Google Lighthouse directly into your Cypress test. So you can also test, for if you want to measure the different client-side performance metrics, like first time to load, the cumulative layout shift. So you can measure these different metrics using the plugin Cypress Audit. And finally, Cypress can also cover, visual testing, and this will be our main focus for today's meetup. So, Cypress, among other things, it validates the structure of your DOM. It will verify that, a button is visible or it has the correct text. However, what about, the look and styling of your application? How can you test that your application looks good visually? If we have a visual bug, your users can notice it quickly. So we need to make sure that we can catch these different issues earlier on. I've actually participated on a panel talk last year, and one of the key topics that we were discussing are what are the trends, what are the types of tests, like techniques that will be like popular for this year. And one of the things that we talked about is around visual testing. So it's becoming much more like popular. It's becoming much more important, and this is why I want to share everyone in today's like session the importance of visual testing and how Cypress can help you with that. So I'm just going to show you some examples of some visual bugs that I've just like discovered like last year. And every company, whether it's like a small company or whether it's a big company, everyone has visual bugs. I am also a firm believer that there's no such thing as a bug-free application. So again, here's just a few examples of the production bugs that I've noticed. And functionally the application is still working. I can still add some emoji, I can still search for a specific like article, but it's not very pleasing to look at, and that is the first thing that us users see on a particular application. So now, I just want you all to imagine that you're part of a team and there's a new login page that's going to be created. So as an example, let's just imagine that this is the initial design mockup that that the UX team has created, and this is the design that your team is currently using. If you want to assert that the page, contains, elements that you expect, then what you can do is, because we obviously want to write some automated tests for it, so that when we, like introduce, new features, that, the login page doesn't, get broken or doesn't have any regression. So what you can do is, let's say if you're going to use Cypress, you can get like individual elements on the page. So you can get the logo, you can get the username, and then assert that it's visible. You can also do things like check if the specific field has the correct text. And for a very simple test, you can see that I had to spend a lot of time finding the different elements on the page, and repeating a lot of the different assertions for each of the different elements. Now, imagine that, because requirements are always changing, that, there's now a design difference. Some elements have been moved around, the page or colors have been updated. There's also some new elements added to the page, and some of the selectors, have been updated. So my functional test, and it's already quite long, won't actually be able to catch all the issues. So it can catch the selector difference if I have that particular selector captured, but we'll have to update the test again to include the new elements, and it also won't be able to detect the changes on the CSS. Now, technically, I can still assert the CSS properties. So I can just, grab the CSS, styling. I can check that it has the correct text decoration, the correct color. But this isn't actually best practice because the test will become complex and it will be really hard to maintain. And this will just make your test super long. I can also guarantee that, if your team, if they see this type of test, they will avoid it like a plague. So, how can you test that our application looks good, visually? We saw that, yep, maybe with functional tests there is a way, but we can always do things better. And this is where visual testing, comes in. So with visual testing, we are, validating what the user sees, visually. However, if you try to do it, manually, because let's imagine like your user base is on a lot of browsers, it's very time consuming. Because you have to do it on different browsers, different like devices, and thus it provides a very slow feedback loop to your team. So like I said, yeah, you have to do it on different browsers, on different like sizes and different viewports. And nowadays, there's not a lot of like functional differences actually between different browsers. So as technologies progress, the code that gets deployed is mostly similar on like different platform. But the way that the code is rendered visually, it still exposes a lot of differences that we need to catch. The obvious solution would be, for this is for us to automate these tests. And this is where automated visual testing can help. Automated visual testing is not exactly new. So, there's a lot of existing tools out there which can help you with, visual testing via like pixel by pixel, like comparison, like algorithms. And the idea with automated visual testing is you have a baseline image, which is your source of truth. And every time there is a code change and your automated test is run, a new test image will be taken. Whichever tool you choose, the visual testing tool will then compare the test image with the baseline image, and then it will scan for like the differences. So at the end, it will report whether your test passed or failed. But let's say you don't have a baseline image, to begin with. If you don't have a baseline image to begin with, whatever first image you have captured, that will be promoted as your baseline image. So now that you know the importance of visual testing, like what is it, which tool? So with the abundance of visual testing, tools out there, which one should you choose? And since this session is specifically focused on Cypress, I'm going to talk about the different visual testing plugins that you can integrate. So looking at this like screenshot, there are different tools, to choose from. Obviously, the decision to choose which tool will be very much dependent on your context. It will depend on the requirements, among other things. So, apart from the tooling, there are so many things to consider when doing visual testing. And this is the part where I would like to talk more about, because I think with a lot of the different projects. Most of us, once we've identified what tool we want to use, then that's it, like we're finished. But to be honest with you, there's a lot of things, like hidden things that we need to consider when implementing visual testing on various projects. I've also written a written version of this particular topic, so if you want to check that out, I've added the link here. So the first thing that obviously you need to consider is, the right tooling. So some visual testing tools, they allow you to leverage your functional tests, while some of the tools allow you to write new separate tests entirely. Depending on which library or, which framework you're using, I think choosing the right tooling is, very important when it comes to adding visual testing to your tests like strategy. So there's a lot of, like visual testing tools now, so you can choose from like third party paid tools such as like Applitools, Percy, Hapo, or even like Chromatic. There's also open source libraries, so libraries like iSpy, Backstop.js, Rate, or Cypress Image, Snapshots, and more. With each of the tooling that's available, you need to do an analysis as to which will meet your testing requirements the most. The other thing that you need to consider is the level of visual testing. So for me personally, I see visual testing as a combination of two things. So it's a combination of component and a combination of, like the full page testing. So when I say component testing, component visual tests, they focus on individual components, and it's like different like variations. So if you're working with like let's say like storybook components, a particular button component can have different like styles, it can have different variation. So it's good to integrate component visual testing to cover all the different stylings, for example. On the other hand, full page testing, it focus the focus for that is to test the entire page, because this is what our user sees at the end of the day. So in your test strategy, you need to consider if you're going to support both levels of visual testing or not. And depending on the type of system that you're working with, you might consider component visual testing very important. So if you're working with systems like design system, then having component visual testing is a must. On the other hand, you need to identify, let's say, like if you have like high traffic pages, then doing full page visual testing is very important to cover that particular area. Again, you've seen this image already, but nowadays, I think it's really important. So um, I am always torn whether or not to introduce both cross-browser functional tests and cross-browser visual tests, because just from the projects that I've been on, we find that there's more visual bugs compared to functional bugs if we try to do cross-browser testing. So in our test strategy, if, for example, getting data from whatever data analytics tool we're using, we actually get like the top five, browsers that were actually are quite like popular in our application. So as a tester, so as part of your test strategy, you can also do the same. So you can check out, which different browsers are popular, which different viewports, and then some tools actually lets you run, cross-browser visual tests. So you'll see later on the different tools that there are some tools out there that can actually support a wide range of browsers, while some tools are quite limited. So you need to decide whether you want to adopt like, let's say, a hybrid approach. So when I say hybrid approach, do you want to run automated visual tests on a single browser and then just check the other browsers manually, or is it really important for you to run automated visual tests on all of the different browsers? So you need to weigh in this particular decision as well. Moving on, so test maintenance is, also another thing that we have to consider when it comes to visual testing, because test maintenance on its own is an activity that is often like overlook, because once we've written the visual tests, we also need to make sure that you can maintain them as the application code base gets like refactored. So from an ownership point of view, who's going to maintain these tests? Some companies, like where like they have dedicated like QA teams who's doing that, then maybe it's the QA team's responsibility. Some companies, so for example, the company that I'm working for at the moment, it's everyone's responsibility to update tests whenever it's failing. So it's the entire development team, for example. So we need to make sure that when it comes to choosing a visual testing tool, that it can integrate easily into your development's workflow. Because if one of your goal is to, let's say, enable your developers to update your test, or to write your test, then whatever tool you choose, they should be like enabled to write visual tests easily as well. Some of the visual testing tools, so there's a couple that I'll talk about later. They actually don't require a lot of test maintenance when adding new visual tests. So let's say if you're using, like, again, the example of like Storybook for the different components, some of the tools out there, you don't actually have to write a lot of tests, because any new component that is added into Storybook, these tools will automatically pick up those components so that they will be automatically tested. So moving on, again, pipeline integration, that's really an important thing that everyone should consider, because one of the things that I am sort of like a believer on is really running a lot of these tests before merging a specific feature onto your main branch. So as part of this, you need to ask yourself if you're going to run the visual tests on every pull request or on every merge request, so that you can get early feedback. Or if let's say you're still starting out, you don't have any like feature branch environment, will you run the visual test after it's been deployed to QA environment? Or let's say some people have like staging environment. There's also the question of when you run the visual test. So if you decide to run it as part of your pull request or as part of your merge request, will you run it on every commit? Or will you have it as a manual job that gets triggered by the person raising a request? Because if you're using open source tools, then that's fine. You can run it on every commit. But if you're using paid tools, where you have to pay for the amount of like snapshots that you have, then running it on every commit might not be ideal, because then the number of snapshots that you accumulate every month might increase. And again, it depends on your like project budget. So if you have a lot of budget, then yeah, you can run it every commit. But yeah, this is one of the key things that we should always think about. So developer experience, I feel that this is, for me, one of the most important things to consider, because when we introduce new types of tests, we need to make sure that the developer experience hasn't degraded. So we need to make sure that the feedback loop is still fast, because in order to get buy-ins from developers, and in order for us to convince them that these tests are valuable, their workflow shouldn't be disrupted as much. So, getting your developers' opinions, it's really crucial, and it's important to consider all different possible scenarios when integrating visual tests. So, as a perfect example, so last year, we've actually integrated, visual tests in one of the projects that I'm currently part of in my current company. So what we did was, we ran the visual tests on our merge request pipelines for about a month. We gathered useful metrics, we gathered feedback from different developers, and rather than sticking to a solution that just works, like we took everyone's feedback, and we basically identified that even if our solution works, it could still be improved. So it's all about like the iteration and improvement process. So it's all about like a trial and error approach. The next thing that I think people should consider is how would you handle baseline images? So I mentioned that visual testing tool works by comparing test images to a set of baseline images. But if you're using like open source tools, how will you store the baseline images? So if you're using open source tools, then you need to have a think on how you will share the baseline images of your team. One thing that when I was starting out with visual testing that I did horribly wrong was to commit the baseline images into our GitHub repo. And I've had some feedback from my developers that every time they pull the project, it was so slow. So again, developer experience has degraded. So, and that was just with like, I think it was just about 20 or 30 images. But imagine, let's say, if you have hundreds of baseline images, then you know that that's not going to be an ideal solution that can scale well. So if you're using open source tools, you need to either store the baseline images on a storage, service such as like an AWS S3 bucket or like something similar. So again, this will incur additional work. So what you can do, again, speak to your development team. They might have ideas on how you can handle baseline images. I know there was a suggestion from others to use Git LFS, but yeah, these are just the things that you have to consider. If you're going for paid plugins, then this shouldn't be a worry because the baseline images are basically stored in their like secure server. So at least that is handled on your it's handled like for you, like automatically. Apart from storing baseline images, when it comes to approving new baseline images, how would you handle scenarios where there are multiple merge requests or multiple like pull requests because you don't want to update the baseline images at the same time? Some visual testing tools, they allow for a mature baseline testing strategy, while other tools, they have limited or even like no support at all. So again, consider this particular like scenario. The next one is, how can you handle dynamic data when it comes to visual testing? Because you want to avoid a lot of like false positives and like unnecessary failures on your visual test. So most of the visual testing plugins, they actually use a pixel by pixel comparison algorithm. So um, you need to make sure that the page you are testing is essentially free of dynamic data as much as possible. So some of the techniques that you can use, so you can make sure that you're using mock data. If you have like dynamic data from a different API, then you need to make sure that you can mock those data instead, so the data is always static. If you're doing animations, you can pause animations, so speak to your development team if you're not sure on how to do that. um, and you can also use like static date and timestamp. So if you have, let's say, a timestamp on a particular page, we know that that's not like static, so you can also mock that particular data. If you do want to compare dynamic data, so one of the tools out there is Applitools. So you can make use of Applitools because they use different AI algorithms to compare images just like a real human would do. Another thing that you can try is, you and your team can decide whether you really want to exclude dynamic data, because most of the visual testing tools, they actually allow you to exclude particular elements when the snapshot process is performed. Another thing, again, this is quite important. So budget and time, constraints. So you need to weigh the pros and cons of, each tool and decide if the tool will deliver more value than costs. And this is definitely needed when evaluating, paid visual testing tools. Because apart from the monetary costs, there's also the time and effort, to integrate these tools. So from a cost perspective, you need to analyze carefully if the features will give you, much more value, and if it will be cost effective and cheaper in the long run. Reporting for me is one of the things that's really important because us, testers need to make sure that our tests are visible, that developers know when they have failed a particular test. So when there are visual changes to be reviewed, how would you communicate that, to your team? Some tools they integrate, to Slack, so or other like platforms. So it's always a good idea to set up some automated notifications so that everyone who's involved, they can see if there are any visual differences that they need to approve or not. And finally, the community and maintenance support. So if you're going for open source tools, you need to check what is the support around that. Are there a lot of tutorials around the tool, or when was the tool last updated? So these are very important questions that you need to consider, because you and your team might look for like further advice on what the community has done. The great thing about paid plugins is that there will always be a dedicated like technical support to help you with any like specific queries. But when choosing a like free plugin, my advice is check what the weekly downloads are, check what sort of like open issues they have, because like some of the tools out there, they haven't really been updated for quite a long time, and some have a lot of like open issues. So check if those issues will actually hinder you from using the tool. Cool. So now let's move on to some tools that can actually help you test for visual changes, and all of these tools integrate well with Cypress. So I'm only going to focus on the three visual testing tools that I have used, on my previous and current projects, and these are Cypress Image Snapshot, Percy, and Applitools. So for each of the tool, we'll look at what the plugin offers, the different pros and cons, and then I'll also do a code walkthrough on how you can integrate these plugin and how you can write visual tests using the three different plugins. So the first tool is it's called Cypress Image Snapshot. So this is a free plugin, and the goal of this plugin is to catch visual regression issues during integration testing. So it's actually based off another plugin. So there's a plugin called Jess Image Snapshot, and if you're familiar with Jess, Jess is a tool that is used for unit testing. So they want to have the same like difference of the images workflow that's available within Cypress. So again, this is a free plugin, and you'll see on the demo on the code walkthrough later that it's very easy to integrate with Cypress, and it's very easy as well to integrate into your CI like pipelines. As for the cons, so I've noticed that it hasn't been maintained recently. So that could be an issue if, let's say, you and your team is working on a specific scenario, and you need some support around that. There is also no single report for visual differences. So what you have to do with this plugin is you have to look at individual images which contain the different visual differences output instead. Since it's pixel by pixel, it only works well if you have a static data. So even if you have like a 1 pixel difference, that will be reported as a failure already. And if cross-browser visual testing is a must for you, then this plugin doesn't have support for other browsers, such as Safari and IE11. Although IE11 support is gonna go soon, but if a lot of your users are still using IE 11, then this plugin will not work for you. Cool. So next up, so we have Percy. So Percy is another visual testing tool that can integrate with a lot of like different frameworks out there. So I'm not just talking about Cypress. So it's actually been acquired by Browser Stack. So the support for this tool is much better. It's a paid tool, but if you want to simply try it out, they have a very generous, like starter plan of 5,000 free snapshots a month. So if you want to do some POC, then yep, I highly recommend having a look at Percy. It has a lot of integration, such as CI integration and GitHub integration as well. So let's say you want to make sure that if there are any visual differences, that developers can see it on their merge requests. So Percy has a GitHub integration which will create like another status or like another job depending on what CI tool you're using, and it will give a report whether there are any visual differences or whether the tests are all good. What I like about Percy is it also automatically checks visual differences. So on both Chrome, Firefox, and Edge, I believe now, because I haven't updated my slide, they actually now have support as well for Safari. So that's a really good addition. You don't have to change anything on your tests, but there is a small configuration on the Percy dashboard if you want to run it on all these different browsers. The dashboard as well is also very handy, so it's quite easy to use. So if you want to easily share the images to the rest of your team so that they can also review it, then you can, give like the Percy link to them. So, for its con, so again, ignore the Safari because they actually now have support for Safari, but yep, it also doesn't have support for 11. And similar with the previous plugin, it only works well if you have static data. So if you have dynamic data, then Percy will also report them as a fail. So the last tool that I want to talk about is Applitools. So unlike the existing visual tools, Applitools uses different AI comparison algorithms. So images are actually compared like how we would compare it. So similar with Percy, it integrates with a lot of different tools and frameworks, but I think Applitools support is much more, better. They have integration with Selenium, with Cypress, of course. They have integration with WebDriver IO, or if you're doing mobile like visual tests, then they can also integrate with Appium, XUI tests, even Espresso. So with Applitools, you can also validate visual differences on a wide range of like different viewports. So it's actually really handy. Similar with Percy, they also have CI and GitHub integration. They have a nice looking dashboard, to view the results, and you can share it as well with your team. I can't really think of any other con apart from that it's very pricey. So you need to make sure that on your business case you have everything prepared, because like obviously if you're coming into your, let's say, like manager for a new tool, then you need to be able to sort of make sure that it's actually really worth it. So you need to make sure that you can also do some like forecasts as to how much the cost would be in the next coming years. Cool. So the last part of this talk is the code walkthrough time. So I've created a GitHub, repo here, to show you how to integrate these different plugins. So if you want, you can clone or you can have a look at this repo afterwards. But I've added all the different like prerequisites as well. So you need to have Node and npm installed because this is a JavaScript project. You need to have like a text editor. So depending on which one you're using, I am personally using VS Code. And if you want to run the application, so it's this application, you need to have a developer key to Unsplash. So Unsplash is a third-party API which basically generates like all these different images. So if you want to run this project locally, you need to export the Unsplash like developer key, so you can pull all these different images. So yeah, for the sample application, it's just a very simple image search React based application. So this will get the latest images from Unsplash, and the data is dynamic, so it changes every day. It also changes depending on what search query you can use. So I've chosen this to show you how you can also do visual tests on the dynamic data. So for the first plugin, so this is with Cypress Image Snapshot. There's only like 3 steps that you need to do. So first, this is quite standard. You have to install the plugin, add it into your project's dev dependencies, and then after that, you have to add like the following code. So you have to add the match image snapshots plugin function to the Cypress plugin index.js. So this basically will register the new plugin to Cypress. And then finally, once it's registered, you have to import the new commands, to your Cypress project. And that is done by just adding these 2 lines of code. And you have to add it into your Cypress support. And it's actually needs to be index.js, so don't add it into your commands.js. In the project, I've added it into the Cypress support index.js file, and it's working as expected. So let's look at the sample test here. So you've noticed that yep, the data is dynamic. So what I want to show you here is how you can mock the data using Cypress. So um, the the first line of code, so which is line number 5, so this is just an additional thing that I've done because I want to wait for the API call to finish when I visit the application. So you can see that I have lines 7 to 9, which basically waits for the API to finish, and then there's just a dedicated timeout for that. But the part about the mocking is actually on line 11. So because Cypress has a command called side.intercept, so what this will do is it will try to intercept the string or the API call that I've added, which in this particular example is search photos query equals mock. And if there is a network call to that, then we just want to return a fixture data called unsplash.json. I'm not going to show what the unsplash.json looks like, but it's just a simple JSON file containing, the same images, so containing like the mock data for the network call. And then now, lines 13 to 17, that's just doing, the search. And then the important thing here is line 19. So the side that match image snapshot actually takes a snapshot of the entire page. Now, when you run this test, so I've created a command here called sci-image snapshot run. So it will actually run this test, and it will upload it to a folder called snapshot, and this will be your baseline images. If you rerun your test, you should see that your test is still passing because technically there aren't any visual differences because we've mocked the data. But imagine if you have made like a visual change to your application. You should see like an error message when you run this test, and there should be a new folder for the visual difference output, and it will show you what the difference are with the test image and the baseline image. So to install Percy, so again, the installation is much more simpler compared to the previous plugin. So to use Percy, the first thing that you need to do is to create a free account. And this is now done via Browser Stack. So once you have a free account, you also need to export a specific like API token, which should be found on the Percy like project setting. So if you want to run the Percy tests as part of your CI pipeline or locally, you need to have this Percy app token exported. To integrate this project, it's just really installing the Percy CLI and Percy Cypress packages. And then on the Cypress support index, you just need to import Percy. And that is pretty much it. Writing the test, so it's quite similar to Cypress image snapshot, but the only difference is in line 19. So instead of using side that match image snapshot, you're going to be using side that Percy snapshot. I've also created a command here called run. So this will actually wrap our Cypress test command in the Percy exec command. So this will start the Percy agent so it can start receiving the snapshots from your Cypress test. And then once the build is finished, they will render the screenshot and it will be uploaded to the Percy dashboard. And if you have some free time, I highly recommend having a play around with the Percy dashboard. It's quite like intuitive. It's very easy to use. You can easily approve or request some visual changes, and it's all done via their dashboard. And the final plugin that I want to demonstrate is Applitools. So out of all the different plugins, I think this is the easiest one to install. But similar with Percy, to first use Applitools, you need to create a free account. And once you have a free account, you need to export your Applitools API token, which is again found on the Applitools dashboard settings page. To integrate this, first, just need to install the package, and you don't even need to update any of the Cypress files because they have a magic, command called npx eyes setup. So when you run this in your terminal, Applitools will automatically add all the different configuration that you need so that you can start integrating Applitools into your Cypress project. And that is it. You don't have to update it manually. You can just run this particular command here. Cool. In terms of writing the test, so there's three different commands that are important with Applitools. First is the side that eyes open, which will actually initiate the Applitools eyes SDK. You can pass it in like the app name, the batch name, and in which browser you want to run it. By default, if you don't specify a browser name, this will run in Chrome. Side that eyes check window will actually take the DOM snapshot, and then side that eyes close, this will just exit the eyes SDK. So once this test has finished, the snapshots will be uploaded to Applitools dashboard, and you might notice here that I'm not doing any mocking compared to Percy and Cypress image snapshot, because with Applitools, as I mentioned, you can use different AI algorithms. So when you log into the Applitools dashboard, you can apply like different types of like algorithms like layout. So with layout, you just want to compare the actual layout. So if any of the images are changed, then the test will still pass as long as it's in the same layout. So wrapping up, I know that's a really quick code walkthrough, but what I want you to do is, hopefully, if you have time, which is, to clone the repo, like in your best time, and then just like try to play around with it, see if you can add any new visual tests. I've also only demoed the basic features of each of the plugins. So if you want to know more about their other features, check out their documentation. And just some final words here. So Cypress alone is not the best tool for testing the look and feel of your application. And make sure to leverage third-party plugins that takes a snapshot of your entire page or specific component, because visual validation gives you a lot more confidence that any issues caused by like CSS changes that your team will make will be caught earlier on. And again, there are so many things to consider when choosing which visual tool to choose. There's also a lot of other things, so make sure to work with your requirements and don't just pick a tool without doing a lot of research and proof of concept. And yeah, foster a trial and error approach. Always experiment with the different tools to see which meets your testing needs the most. And that is it for me. If there are any questions, then yeah, I'm happy to answer them now.
Thank you so much, Mary, for this wonderful session. We have a couple of questions for you, which I will
Mhm.
take them as we progress. So, if you have any questions, anyone, just put them in the Q&A tab. I'll be taking first the visual testing questions, and then we can go for generic Cypress questions as well. So, before we get on to the questions, Mary, just wanted to ask you one particular question. Is We have a lot of tests, right? And we talked a lot about visual testing today. So, how do you schedule your time with regards to the pace at which our delivery is, with regards to getting time for accessibility, security, and even visual testing for that matter? What was your recommendation
Yeah.
around this aspect?
So I think this is why I'm a big advocate of Cypress because from my experience, the developer experience is really good. I often found that I have a lot of developers really enjoying using Cypress. So because I have a lot of developer buy-ins, convincing them to make sure we can shift testing much more earlier on is quite easy. They're the ones giving suggestions as well on how we can improve our existing like pipeline integration. And it's about, it's not just me who's doing the work. I'm delegating all these different tasks to like other like quality engineers as well. So as a perfect example, one of our QEs just integrated the Cypress Acts library onto our merge request pipelines. So it's all about, yeah, just trying to get everyone involved and not just doing it all by yourself.
Great. So I'll take a question from Shweta. She asks, "How do you do visual cross-browser testing using Cypress? Any
Mm-hmm.
tool would you like to suggest? If yes, how do we run parallel tests?"
Yeah. So for this, the best tool that I have worked with so far is really Applitools. So with Applitools, they can actually run your tests in parallel as well. So depending on like the plan that you have with them, you can run your test in parallel without you doing a lot of additional, configuration into your pipeline. It's just a config setting in your Applitools config. So if that is really a must for you, then I highly suggest looking over at Applitools. They have a lot of support for like a wide range of like browsers, wide range of mobile devices, of different viewports, and you can run it in parallel. So just have a look at their documentation and then see if that is something that can help you.
Great. There's another question which is not specific to visual testing. Could you share some info with regards to performance test capabilities of Cypress? This is from Balaji.
Yeah. So with performance tests, like we often think about it in two areas, like the client side and the server side. So when I say performance test with Cypress, it's just really focus on the client side. So if you want to measure like the different Google Lighthouse, metrics, if you want to have your Google Lighthouse score integrated with your Cypress test, then that's the part that I am talking about. If you're thinking of, let's say, doing load testing or like stress testing, Cypress is not the tool for that. There's a lot of other tools that you can use out there. But if you just want to, let's say, if you want to track your Lighthouse score, and it's not the best indication, but it's a good indication to see what will be your client side, performance for a single user. Then if you want to leverage your Cypress test, then you can integrate the Cypress audit plugin.
Makes sense. Just one more question. This again is regards to how you can integrate Cypress for
Mm-hmm.
CI integration. So I believe Shailesh has tried it out with Jenkins, but was facing some issues. So what are your recommendations with regards to CI integrations here? Would Circle
Yeah,
CI be a solution or?
yeah, I guess it's quite difficult to comment because I'm not sure what the multiple issues are that you're experiencing with Jenkins. But if you look at the different like Cypress documentation, they do have support for Jenkins, for Circle CI, for GitLab, for GitHub. Personally, I've used Circle CI on my previous project and we've integrated Cypress. We did had some issues, but we've integrated it all okay. It's just really about talking to your developer, see if they have some suggestions as well. Currently, we're integrating it with GitLab. So far, no issues, and it's really helped that we're using the Cypress, like the different Docker images. So with Circle CI, I found less issues compared when I was using it with as sorry. So when I was using it with GitLab, we found less issues compared to when we were using it with Circle CI. So I can't really give you a specific answer because I'm not quite sure what issues you're having. But again, in terms of suggestion, just maybe speak to your, if you have like a DevOps team or if you have like developers who are really well versed with like circles of with CI configuration, just have a word with them, see if they can help you with your issue.
Great. So there's one question from Nitish. How can we filter test in Cypress? Any good suggestions on usage of tags?
Mm-hmm. That's a really excellent question. I've actually written a blog post on how you can do this. I'm not sure how best to share that. Maybe I'll share it in the chat. But there is, and so apart from the solution that I have blog, which I'll try to share later, there is actually a official, not official, but there is a plugin out there called Cypress grep, and it's written by Gleb, who used to work for Cypress. So he's written a lot of good examples on how you can filter Cypress tests using tags, and it also has other functionalities as well. So I suggest have a look at either my blog post or have a look at the Cypress grep package.
Great. So we'll share the links as well with you so that you can get more. There's one more from Balaji. Like, how reliable are Cypress
Mm,
record and playback tests?
yeah. Um, and again, I'm not saying this to just promote my blog, but because I've written a specific blog post about this. I've actually played around with the Cypress Studio, and I'm quite impressed with the tool. It's one thing that I am hoping to use in our current company because we still have a legacy framework. So what I want is for us to stop using the legacy framework and find a way to sort of switch or to sort of replace those with like the new tests, and I think Cypress Studio can help us. So the Cypress Studio, it's still very limited, but it can record things like typing into a field, ticking check boxes, clicking buttons. It can even automate, or it can even record like assertion. So if you right click on a particular element, you can choose different types of assertions that you want. um if you're planning to, let's say, use it for um like mocking data or intercepting network requests, then Cypress Studio can't really do that. It can only handle like basic like scenarios. I would say it's reliable if your application only, if you only want to automate like the basic flows, and if you want to have like a quick way for you to generate these tests, then yep, have a look at Cypress Studio, because I was quite impressed that even the assertions, these can also be automatically generated for you.
Thank you so much for that. There's one from Vijo. He asks your experience and
Mhm.
differences between Web.io and Cypress.
Um, I don't have a specific like comparison like blog, although I have used both WebDriver IO and Cypress. If you want to run it, again, on like different, it has like much more browser support, and WebDriver IO is quite good. I believe it also integrates well with Apium. So if you want to leverage it with, testing your mobile application, WebDriver IO is quite good. Cypress doesn't have the capability to do that. The way tests are written, I think it's quite similar, because if I remember correctly, with WebDriver IO, you don't have to do a lot of like async await compared to other tools that are, based in like JavaScript. So yeah, I think both tools are great. I have used WebDriver IO in the past, but I don't really have like a specific like comparison blog to tell you. Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Jocelyn.
Hey, sorry. So there's one question from Shweta. Like she asks, like, how do you do geo visual testing? So basically,
Mm, based
uh,
on the
yeah,
location.
because based on location, the visual features would change, and
Mm,
basically the private IP will have to be a private IP. So, like,
yeah.
any experience working on geo visual testing?
I have to be honest, I don't have experience with this, although because Cypress runs in the browser, you should have access to like the developer console, and on the console there's an option, to change your geolocation. I am not 100% sure, but I think you can access this directly from your Cypress test, because if you have access to the DevTools console, you should have access to update the geolocation. So you should do this as part of your, let's say, before hook, before you run your test. So you can then, have like a particular, let's say, custom command that you can use for your different tests, and just pass in the correct like coordinates. I haven't tested this myself, but I'm quite certain that from your Cypress test, you can access the DevTools, console. You can access like the different commands, and one of those commands should allow you to update like the geolocation. How to run the above test, because it will be using private IP. So I guess one of my question would be, if you were to spin up like the application locally, if that is, always possible, then I suggest just running it locally as part of your, pipeline, and then just doing some like sanity check whenever it's deployed to a particular like environment. Yeah.
Great. Uh, this is probably not a bit of Cypress, but
Mm-hmm.
what Emilia is asking is more towards when you're creating a CI/CD pipeline. If your backend is on GitLab and your front end is on GitHub,
Mm-hmm.
how easy and feasible it is to maintain.
Mm. So I'm a firm believer that um we should have a way of like separating, this. So if you have your back end, because I think it's like the same thing. If you have your back end and front end projects on like different, repos, even if they are on the same pipeline, but they're still on a different projects, then that will also mean that it's on a different pipeline. So if there are changes on the back end, then I guess you want to make sure that the, front end doesn't have some changes that are unexpected. So an approach that you can do here is something called contract testing. It's something that we're currently doing here in our current company, where we have different like back-end data providers that we integrate on our GraphQL layer. So if we think about GraphQL being like our front end, and then the different data provider as our back end, they are on different pipelines, even if we're using GitLab. So they are still on different pipelines. in order to have confidence that whatever changes there are on our data providers, we utilize contract testing. We make sure that whenever we deploy changes, we check first if the data contract is valid. So um, I believe that this should still be separate, but you should utilize other testing techniques, like contract testing to see if changes are all like compatible with each other. Because what you don't want to happen is changes on the back end causing a lot of like unnecessarily, like breakage on your front end. And it's actually a good time because I have the workshop coming on March about contract testing. So if that is something that is of interest, then yeah, that would be a really good one.
Awesome. So let's take another question. This is based on uh, how you can test authentication of social network providers. Any
Yeah,
experience with that?
this is something that I want to avoid as much as possible with Cypress because I know it is a pain. There is a third party library that you can use. I don't know the exact name. It's just something that I've seen, but basically they have examples on how you can integrate or how you can automate, like for example Google login or Facebook login. However, it will only work locally. If you try to integrate it into your CI, pipeline, it will not work. But yeah, I tend to avoid this type of like scenarios to automate with Cypress because they are really a pain. So not gonna be helpful, but my suggestion will be if there is a way for you to turn it off on your QA environment or whatever environment it is that you're testing your Cypress test, then that would be so much better. It will save you a lot of time and headache.
Great. So I think we are good with the questions. One last question, Mary. You have explained about a lot of open source libraries, and you talked about the Cypress image snapshot. Based on your experience, if you want to start off with visual testing, like what is how your experience been with open source and paid
Yeah.
tools?
Um. So I started off with the open source tool just so that I can really build, my knowledge, really start to build, my sort of, other things to consider because when I was starting with the open source tool, there's actually a lot of learnings that I have, learned. So because of these learnings, it made my my experience with visual testing like a lot better. So I would say start with like open source tools, see how they do the pixel by pixel comparison, just have a play with that. And then if you're planning to scale up on a much more bigger project where you really have to you know like scale up and you have to integrate it on like different merge request pipelines, then yeah, maybe it's time for you to try some third party tools because there's a lot of like again headaches or configuration that you'll have to do yourself if you're just using the open source tool. It depends as well how many snapshots you have. If for example you just have less than 10 snapshots, I would just maybe stick with an open source tool. But if you have more and if you have to run it on a lot of like browsers, a lot of different sizes, then yeah, I would say go for a third party tool.
Thank you so much. I think we are on the top of the hour. Thank you, Mary, for answering all the questions here. Thanks, people, for all the interesting questions that were shared. So, thank you, Mary, for your time and
Thank
being here with
you.
the uh, test drive. I think it's not going to be far when we see you again at the Work
Yeah,
Friends conference. So, hoping to see you back again there. Uh,
thank
for
you. Yeah.
for people who have not known about Work Friends, just hit the URL and grab your discount code. Mary will be talking about contract testing there. So don't miss out the session. And yeah, I think you're getting kudos from everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here, spending your Saturday, and investing that in learning. So thank you so
Thank
much, everyone. Thank you,
Yeah.
Maheti.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you again.
Balaji.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Nitish. Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks, Mahiti. Thanks for organizing this. Thanks, Shailesh. Awesome. Good day ahead and see you for the next one.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Yep.
Bye bye.